let me know when we're live streaming. Yep.
We're live.
Okay, excellent. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the meeting of the Maryland State Board of Education's Education Policy Committee. We'll be taking up two different items today, a COMAR item related to programs for homeless children. This is a permission to adopt, and we'll be taking up a review of the comprehensive literacy policy, which we have been working on for several months. So we'll be taking up both those items, and we appreciate that you're here with us today and that you have tuned in to be part of our work. So we'll start today with COMAR 13A.05.09, Programs for Homeless Children, Permission to Adopt. And Ms. Gable, can you get us started on that, please?
Certainly can. Thank you, Ms. McCusker. So this one is very easy. This purpose of this Programs for Homeless Children was get our COMAR aligned with the statute, in particular, Every Student Succeeds Act. And there were some alignments of the language that were not aligned with the statute. So it came before you on April 30th. You unanimously voted for permission to publish. It was in the Maryland Register from September 6th to just April 7th. We received no comments. Just as a note, previously the amendments were taken before our homeless liaisons. This is noted in your transmittal, attorneys, advocates, and youth with the Homeless Persons Representation Project. So it was vetted previously. We had it before the board, no comments, requesting that you adopt this regulation. And you have the regulation. There are a number of changes, and you know everything. And for those that are new, everything that is in red is coming out, and everything that is italics and highlighted in yellow is new language, but it's just aligning it and taking care of our homeless children.
Okay, thank you very much. Do we have any questions from members of the committee or members of the board? Okay, well, if we don't have objection, then I move that we put this in as on consent agenda for the meeting on the 22nd. Do we have any objections to putting this on consent agenda? Seeing none, then we will move it forward to the consent agenda for the board meeting on the 22nd. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Perfect. Thanks. Have a good day.
Excellent. Thanks. Okay, and now we're going to move to our review of version 4 point maybe 3 or 4. We're making changes to this document as late as a couple of hours ago. So for those of you who may have an earlier version that you pulled off of the website within the last day or two, it is a new version and this version has only been on the website probably for a couple of hours as we continue to tweak it and make it as good as we could get it. So just wanted the public to be aware that we may have a slightly different version depending on when you last took a look. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Collins and Dr. Smith to give us a review.
Thank you, Ms. McCusker. Mr. Hands, can someone give me access to share my screen?
Simba, could you grant Dr. Collins access?
It is granted now.
You're on mute.
Can everyone see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
All right. So Dr. Smith's camera isn't working, but I believe you can hear her. So our apologies for technology. Right. So we're going to just give you some updates on the process used for stakeholder feedback way from the beginning. making the case for why we need this literacy policy, the fundamental provisions in the policy and some of the major revisions, update on support and guidance, and the implementation timeline and next steps. And as Ms. McCusker mentioned, we have continued to make many revisions to the policy, in particular focusing on the timeline to make sure there was alignment with that as well. So the board adopted its resolution back in January of 2024, and as a part of that resolution required the state to develop a draft comprehensive literacy policy. So we began drafting, and then between June through October, we have released 4 versions, and we're at number 4 today, of the literacy policy. We've had close to 2,000 comments come in. We've been on phone calls, we've been in different focus groups, but a lot of different comments and feedback around the policy. Time for us to clarify different aspects of the policy, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But actually the amount of stakeholder engagement that we've received has been wonderful, and we appreciate the time and energy that folks have dedicated to do that. We know everyone's schedules are busy, but from the letters and phone calls and focus groups, it's just helped us to get to a better policy for Maryland. So we can't say enough how appreciative we are of the number and amount of feedback that we've gotten from so many different stakeholders to get to this point where we're requesting for the board to adopt the policy. As we've been mentioning, we have an urgent need to improve literacy outcomes in Maryland. As we've mentioned, the grade 4 National Assessment of Educational Progress Assessment has shown that Maryland's performance has declined from 3rd to 41st in the nation. And then you've seen the recent Maryland Comprehensive Assessment data for English language arts, which also shows that we've had a decline in literacy performance, especially for our students living in poverty, our multilingual learners, and our students of color. So our data is really calling us to action. And our hope is that this policy will ensure equitable access for all students, helping us to really know the needs of individual children, right? What their needs are, and intervene very early and have a plan in place that we can monitor to make sure all students, regardless of their background, where they're coming from, they have the supports needed, but they can also be reading on and above grade level. So this is really looking at all children and seeing them as individuals, recognizing their strengths, recognizing their talents, but where we need to really narrow in on the skill sets that they need to get better. And that's why we are coming to the board today to request your adoption of the policy. So I'm going to transition to Dr. Smith to go give you some background on some of the data that I mentioned earlier on. Dr. Smith?
Thank you. One of the integral pieces of the policy includes shoring up some of the language around the Ready to Read Act. Ready to Read was implemented and enacted in 2019, and it really requires LEAs to provide screenings for all kindergarten students and identified 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade students. Well, with that being the case, we find that some districts will choose to screen all of their children, kindergarten through 3rd grade, but some districts took the law, the COMAR, as it's stated, and they choose to identify students in which to screen in 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade. That means if a kiddo enters kindergarten and they exit kindergarten and they may not have flagged as needing supports, they may not be screened when they get to 1st grade, or they may not be screened again when they get to 2nd grade, which then could provide an opportunity to increase the gap for the skills that they need. The data that we're showing here today is these are the 3 LEAs with the highest percentage of students who flagged for being at risk at the beginning of the year for each grade level. As you can see, Caroline County, for instance, they had screened, identified 259 students who were flagged as being at risk at the beginning of the year. By the end, that's 70% of the students who were enrolled. By the end of the year, they were able to close that gap, quite a big gap, by 50%. So 29, 30, 40%, 29.5% of their students, so 116 kids, always going back to the number, the child, 116 kids were identified as being at risk by the end of the year. So they were able to make those gaps. And you can see that across the board from Dorchester as well as Baltimore City. Their gap, they weren't able to close the gap as much in kindergarten, but they still reduced the number from 49.4 to 34.8. As you get up into the upper grade levels, in third grade, for instance, Dorchester, they identified 193 kids at the beginning of the year as being at risk. At the end of the year, they still had 193 children who were identified or flagged as being at risk for reading difficulties. So us being able to shore up how we are screening kids and identifying kids who are at risk in kindergarten, first, second, and third grade, as well as developing a way or a centralized dashboard of collecting this data so that it is universal. We're comparing apples to apples and not apples to pears. And we're able to report it to the board so that the board can see how our children are doing and how our districts or LEAs are, what they're doing and how they're screening the kids. So part of the policy does ask for additional guidance and supports for LEAs around screening, reporting this information to the State Board of Education, as well as ensuring that districts are providing the supplemental instruction needed for those kids who are flagged as being at risk. Next slide, please. Dr. Collins mentioned our MCAP data and it being very concerning around our subgroup populations, right? And so what we asked our office of Matt Duque to do was to look at, pull the data around our subgroup and let's look and see what's happening as they progress through the grades. So if you look at the third grade, these are students who are scoring in the lowest proficiency level. Black and Hispanics had the lowest percent proficient in MCAP ELA across all tested grade levels. So that's third through 8 and grade 10. So our African-American students are scoring at the lower end. 34% are, only 34% in third grade are proficient, only 33% are proficient in 8th grade, and only 43% are proficient in 10th grade. And our Hispanic students are scoring lower. 29.4% are scoring proficient in 3rd grade, and 39.4% are scoring proficient by the time they get to 10th grade. Now, with that being said, we also wanted to see what happens. Let's follow a subgroup of kids. Let's find out what happens. Next slide. So we looked at a subgroup of students from 2022 to 2024. So our 3rd graders who in 2022 who took the MCAP and they scored on the lowest performance level, level 1, we had 15.5% score at level 1. By the time they got to 5th grade, the number or the percentage of students scoring in the lowest percentile, performance level, level 1, increased to 19.2. So a 3.8% increase. That's telling because that means that the gap is getting wider. So those skills that they missed, those foundational skills or the skills that they may not have acquired in the earlier grades exacerbated and multiplied as they got older. And so we see it showing up more in 5th grade. So we end up with more kiddos who are scoring in the lowest performance level. And our Latino students, we're seeing similar trends. 15.7 start out in level 1%. And then by the time they get to 5th grade, 18.4 or 2.6% increase in the level 1 performance level. This is part of that call to action because we have to do something to help these subgroups of students whose gaps in education, whose gaps in literacy instruction are getting wider and wider as they progress and go further and further. Next slide.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. So in terms of, while we, again, are at version 4 and have made numerous revisions, we just wanted to call out some of the major revisions that we've made to the policy along the way. We've continued to clarify the inclusion of all students, and at our last state board meeting, pretty clear that we wanted to make sure pre-K was included. So this version does reflect the inclusion of pre-K, and we'll talk a little bit about the professional learning that we've provided, but we've tried to add more language to that. We wanted to try and call out how we will be supporting and assisting our LEAs around policy guidance, technical assistance, multi-tiered systems of support, the promotion policies, and the student reading intervention plans as well. Emphasizing, again, robust core instruction, making sure that all students have access to core instruction, even if they are in need of an intervention, and then providing specific criteria for reading intervention programs. And we do recognize many of our LEAs have some of these systems in place, so we're trying to provide clarification so that they don't need to start from scratch, but they can take a look at their existing programs and where they may need to make some shifts. We've also tried to identify additional options for adequate supports for students and the use of multiple measures of data rather than just a single measure to determine students' readiness. We've tried to add some more descriptive language to be transparent about expectations for all students, and provide our districts with multiple pathways of supports for our parents and students. And we've continued to update the timeline and make sure that there are multiple pathways for students and parents in our LEAs to provide some support. So those are at the high levels, like some of the major revisions that we've made to the policy. Dr. Smith is going to give you a little bit more information in terms of pre-K and the professional learning that's aligned, that's happening and to come.
And so while we are making multiple pathways for students as well as for parents, we also want to keep in mind our educators, our teachers. We want to make sure that we provide multiple pathways for them as well. We are working with the Office of Early Childhood to enhance the professional learning offerings around the science of reading for our child care providers and our PK educators. So we are establishing cadres of teachers or childcare providers who can go through our AIM pathways offering. We're also are embedding the science of reading in within the offerings that are already offered through the early learning content collaboratives. We have ongoing virtual professional learning and coaching. We're starting a cadre of coaches to provide supports. We're going to pilot that to support classroom implementation of the science of reading. And I say this over and over again, the professional development is one thing, but the coaching, the job embedded, ongoing professional learning, that is how we transfer that learning around the science of reading into the classroom. And that is where we get to the outcomes, the increased student outcomes. And so we're working to also develop easy to understand one-pagers in multiple languages for parents around the early learning standards and how you can support your kiddos with literacy development at home. And we have a couple other things we'll share with you about that as we go forward in the PowerPoint presentation. In addition, we're working, next slide, we have secured a $40 million United States Department of Education Comprehensive Literacy State Development Grant that is goes into October 1. So by March of 2025, we expect to award the first round at $3.8 million and $10 million each subsequent year after that. It's our vision within the Comprehensive Literacy State Development Grant that we create a community that is supportive of our comprehensive state level of systems of supports. We increase administrator leadership, teacher efficacy and literacy instruction. And if we do all of this through coaching and supports, then we should see an increase in our student literacy outcomes. And so this comprehensive state literacy development grant, it specifically focuses on providing access to LEAs. 95% of the funds have to go to LEAs, with identifying and supporting literacy coaching in the elementary classrooms. We will also provide funding to develop additional supports for early childhood, because it is a birth to grade 12 grant. And we are looking to provide supports. 40% of the funding goes to secondary. So we will asking secondary LEAs who are interested in providing some support for secondary to consider coaching as a vehicle to do that as well. But within the confines of that, we will be providing additional pathways for teachers so that they are able to differentiate the types of instruction or the types of professional learning that they receive in order to impact their student outcomes. So in essence, what we expect to do is to use our screening data to identify what the kids need, administer or have teachers self-select or self-identify what their needs are, and then provide the professional learning that will support the teacher to therein support the child who is struggling in a particular area. So we have an assessment that's built into this grant that will help educators identify what areas they are most in need of support or professional learning to be able to increase their students' outcomes. Next slide.
Go ahead.
We're also, I was going to let you do it, but we're also in works communication. We started the process in collaboration with our communications team to develop an education media campaign to increase our family and community stakeholders' knowledge about the importance of effective literacy instruction. And so one of the things that we have in the works, and we hope to have a sample for you, are our family guides for student success, which are simply the most difficult standards that are hard for kiddos to master. They're sample activities that parents can do at home to support their kid with helping a kid sort of close that gap with that particular standard. It's in family-friendly terms. Definitions are commonly used words. There are tips, there are questions to ask your child's teacher. As well, we are also developing home activities around core learning. So what is letter knowledge, right? How do you work with sounds? How can you help increase vocabulary for those youngest learners? We do have the set pre-K through grade 8, and we will be looking to develop a birth to grade 8 set of resources for parents. And so it's well underway. We have, this will be a multimedia type outreach, including videos, little biteables, which are the animated shorts around the particular components of reading. In addition, Dr. Wright has so graciously agreed to develop or to give the opening component or opening intro to one of the videos that we expect to have very shortly. So those parent guide supports and guidance are pivotal, and they're important components that will help us get to that end goal of increasing our student outcomes. Dr. Collins.
Thanks, Dr. Smith. And so as I mentioned, we have a timeline that's outlined in the actual policy. So we are beginning to do some technical assistance, as I've mentioned, around a lot of the components. and make sure that the resources are aligned. We're very thankful and appreciative of some of our partners, not just our LEAs, but our community partners that have expertise in some of these areas who we've reached out to as another set of eyes, but also to directly provide support in developing some of these resources that we need to put together. And so just want to say thank you up front, because it's been very helpful to have those with expertise to build this out for us. So again, we're going to be continue to provide supports. In terms of HQIM reviews and designations, that will be coming out actually. It's something we've updated in the policy. We'll be able to provide a list of reviewed materials indicating if they're designated a HQM, QIM, and hopefully by the fall, we'll have that completed. But we think that's going to be very important for LEAs, and not for them to say, we can't use what we have and we need to, we need money to purchase something new. No, it's to give them an idea of what is identified as HQIM as they continue to have to make decisions around high quality instruction materials. We're giving them the resources and supports up front and taking away a lot of the legwork. And then the LEAs will begin to implement the models at MTSS. And again, we need to make sure that our LEAs are ready. And so we'll be closely monitoring this timeline. We have 24 LEAs that are in very different places. Some are further along, some are on a different pathway depending on how many teachers have been trained. And so we just want to make sure that this timeline is also customizable based on where our individual LEAs are as well, and then implementing all the components of the policy by 27-28. As Tanette mentioned, in terms of what's next, building out those supports for parents and LEAs. As she mentioned, PSA type snippets for parents to actually have quick tidbits of what science of reading means and things that they can do at home. Again, the professional learning around the multi-tiered systems of support and continued leadership courses for leaders. And statewide parent nights, right? Getting us out of where we are, MSD in Baltimore, and going on a road show really around the state to provide more information and clarification around the policy. But what do we mean when we say science of reading, structured literacy, to really make sure that our stakeholders are clear? And again, as Dr. Smith mentioned, we really believe this grant, because the majority of the money goes back to the LEAs, will provide them with an opportunity to determine, okay, based on where they are, how do they need to allocate their resources so that teachers have what they need to do this hard, tough work in the classroom. We will also be looking at, we've already started to look at our COMAR to make sure that it can be updated to align with any areas in the policy if the policy is approved, once the policy is approved. And so we'll bring those back to the policy committee and just continue to collaborate to make sure that we're normed across the agency. And so that is our presentation. I know that we also shared a copy of the policy as well. And Ms. McCusker, I'll turn it back to you.
Hey, thank you very much. Lots of information. I also want to thank the team very much for their responsiveness to members of the board and members of the public who have been giving input. I know that this has been a massive lift for your very small department, and I want you to know that your work is noticed and appreciated. So thank you very, very much. Do we have any questions or discussion from board members who are in attendance?
I have a quick question. It's Monica.
Please go ahead.
Yep, thank you. Did you give a date of when the guide will be ready? I was listening, but maybe I didn't listen great.
So with the guidance document?
The guidance document, yes.
Deanne, do you and Tanette have a guesstimate on that right now?
So we've already started drafting, but it will depend on what gets approved in the policy. Those should be ready by December, I would think, sometime this fall, right? Fall, early winter. But we've started drafting knowing what the LEAs are already doing and what they've asked us. For example, the LEAs are asking for some support and some samples of master scheduling. So we already have those samples built out. They've asked for some support in terms of what like the student day might look like if they're going to be implementing the intervention. So we've started to build that out. So we have enough of the framework that that our goal is to get them out no later than December is our goal.
Okay. Okay. You might want to say that. I think December is around the corner and think that's a lofty goal, but that's me. So, but if you're saying December, go for it. But I think you should publicly say it. Thank you.
And there are certain things we feel like the LEAs need right now. So we've also talked about, versions, right? Like what do we need to get out, sort of really early, and then what can we continue to build out?
Thank you. Ms. Medina.
Hi, thank you all so much for your hard work. I really appreciate how diligently you guys have kind of addressed everyone's comments and questions. And the only thing I wanted to kind of ask was still about the parent choice, right? I love the way that it's been written out. I think it's very, very clear. My only concern is that the information we've received so far from the LEAs is that overall people are really struggling with parent and community engagement. And so I guess my question to you all is that a part of the technical assistance, or is there special consideration for how we're going to help the LEAs to engage? Because the default, based on the policy, the default, if there's no communication, is the retention. So my second part to that question is, I did see that you have a very clearly outlined statement that the LEA has to come up with a clear process and procedure about that documentation and showing that there was no communication. Do those documentations have, do you guys get eyes on that so that we're making sure that they're diligently written? So those were my two things, is just making sure that we have some really good things in place for that parent choice to really happen.
Thank you, Ms. Medina. That's a very great point. One thing that I can say is that we too are going to be leaning in heavy on what that looks like, LEA by LEA. I feel like MSDE is blessed to be so close to many of our LEAs, because I've actually had the privilege of having those kinds of conversations with the LEAs as we've developed this. Like, what is your current level of engagement on any type of very these policies that we need parents to engage in? Because to your point, I remember when I was a classroom teacher and a principal, sometimes parents are just hard to get to, right? And so this is going to cost. Some of the LEAs said, yes, we're going to have to really think differently about how we engage parents earlier on to make sure they're clear in the decision-making process. So some of this, I think, we'll be able to solve definitely by giving guidance, but we're going to have to be side by side, sitting next to them to do this. I know one of the beneficial things that strategies that worked really well with the blueprint and implementation plans is we held one-on-one meetings with LEA teams to talk through. And we believe we're going to need to do this with this literacy policy, not just on the area that you're talking about, but on a variety of areas. And while that may take time, we're standing ready to do that, because we feel like we can then provide very customized support based on where the LEAs are. And then we've built in some ways where we can get eyes on the LEA processes. Some of them they will have to send directly to MSDE, but also because of the many touch points that we have, we'll be able to get eyes on their processes ahead of time to give them feedback and make sure that they're robust enough to get the parent. So I'm glad you asked that. It's very, very important. Dr. Smith, I see your hand up. Oh, we can't hear you. Your mic isn't working. Sorry. But I'm sure you have a good point.
Okay, thank you. Does that answer your question, Ms. Medina?
Yeah, and I mean, just to as a quick follow-up, I'm sure that Dr. Wright and Dr. Collins, you all are aware that there's also a lot of trepidation around engaging with parents. I know as a school counselor, when we were trying to help people build these relationships, people just default to, well, I emailed them or I sent them a message in Class Dojo, and there's just not connection. So, there definitely does need to be some hands-on work to rebuild the school community partnership, because teachers just do not want to have those face-to-face conversations or phone calls. They're just so scared. I don't know why. Like, I love talking to parents, but there's just a lot of trepidation with the kind of engagement that is really needed for this policy to be successful.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that up because Deanne was right. It's a very important part, and so just know that we are. That's part of the campaign that that Deanne and Tanette were discussing around what we're doing around parent engagement to just start making parents aware, but then following up with those parent-friendly pieces of information in multiple languages around how this would impact their child, how they can get involved. And I think those family success guides in multiple languages is going to be really good as well, because I think it'll start engaging parents in a more comfortable way. But it's something we're going to have to be constantly diligent about. There's no doubt about that.
And we recognize that we do need to get out and side by side with LEAs to engage, have conversations with parents. And so we will engage in some of the same type of road shows that we did in Mississippi. We are already in the planning process of developing a series in collaboration with our Office of Multilingual Learners, our Office of Gifted Services, and of course our literacy office. We will go out and provide some parent nights alongside the LEAs. So we don't expect LEAs to do this by themselves. We really want to be seen as a support and a partner in this process.
Thank you. Dr. Lewis.
I have two questions, and one is probably the most complicated, so I'll ask it first. Happily, information was added to the literacy policy around retention that a student wouldn't necessarily have to stay in third grade. They can move on to fourth grade, have intensive instruction in language arts and reading, but they could have access to fourth grade math, science, social studies, specials, etc. How will the guidance address that? Because in some school districts, that could be a major change, and how fourth grade teachers and even fifth grade teachers sort of attack that flexible grouping that now would need to be available to students.
I can see part of that, Kim, coming through the guidance documents, because I think Deanne was talking about the need for more information around how to structure the master schedule. And so what would that look like? What would class groupings look like? Because even children that are retained in third grade, who are perfectly capable of doing fourth grade math, need to be provided that as well. So I think all that gets spelled out very clearly in the guidance document that the team is developing.
My hope would be in that regard that a student does move on to fourth grade to continue to be with their age appropriate peers while getting the intensive instruction that they need in reading. So that's my feeling about that. Then the other thing has to do with timelines. I was thankful for the explanation you just gave on the high quality. I know I've been sort of keep bringing this issue up on the high quality instructional materials. And the goal, I think you said, was to have them by
I think
winter,
fall of 26,
yeah,
fall of 26.
26. And so I'm just doing the math in my head. If a district already has them, great. But if they don't, they still have to obtain them through procurement. And then a student is supposed to get 2 years of high quality language arts instruction prior to this whole looking at the retention, et cetera. It could be that a district doesn't have the high quality instructional materials in time to get the 2 years of intensive reading instruction and tiered intervention that they may need. I'm just concerned about this, again, this push on the timeline where high quality instructional materials aren't quite available to students and families.
Yeah, Deanne, do you want to speak a little bit to that? Because we
Yeah.
did that survey
Yeah.
around the percentage of LEAs that are currently using high quality instructional materials. So
That's correct. Yeah. So
And then-
great question, Dr. Lewis. Thanks for asking. So over the past 2 years, as we've been trying to build a model for HQIM from Maryland, we were able to gather some information from LEAs on the percentage that are currently using HQIM. Some of our LEAs also have homegrown curriculums, right, as well. But based on our learning from naturally from other states and how HQIM is supposed to be, we are providing actually, we also know from the initial blueprint implementation plans that all of our LEAs submitted, they have a clear process for curriculum adoption, and they use ed reports, which is like the floor, right?
Mhm.
So they already are familiar with the rating system, and our process is aligned. So we don't, the state does not tell LEAs which curriculum that you must use or purchase. It is up to them. What we are doing is helping them to see, okay, this is what's nationally rated as green in terms of curriculum. And then teachers will help us to look at some of the other areas as linguistically developed and culturally affirming for students. But LEAs will not be required to use our list. It's a way for us to help with their adoption cycle, because also LEAs are also on different adoption cycles. But the blueprint called for the state to develop curriculum and resources to support LEAs with implementing high quality instruction materials. So we have an idea now where LEAs are, and they do, especially in terms of literacy, have a very rigorous process for identifying HQIM. We are building out a model that will help them to feel even better that what they've selected is of quality. From what we've seen, nothing is bad. So our LEAs are not using curriculums that are not, user friendly for students, but this will help them. And this is going to be over time. Like, this is never going to be ending. This HQIM cycle is going to have to continue and go on and on and on. And that's pretty much how it's done in states. Where we are going to need to lean in heavily as a state, and this is what we've learned from other states, is on the implementation supports, right? So you purchase a high quality curriculum, the vendor comes in and does maybe 1 or 2 days training, and then they may leave. Well, that's not going to help a teacher with the implementation around the day-to-day. And so we need to lean in on the day-to-day supports for our LEAs, for the teachers to provide the high quality curriculum, because you also need the teacher that has the skill set to do that. So this is going to be over time. And so we recognize some of the nuances with the timeline, but it's really to begin to give our LEAs a picture of what HQIM is available, and as they begin to make decisions, because we knew some may be they're on very different adoption cycles. Tanette, did I miss anything there at all?
No, you hit it on the nail on the head. Yeah.
I just want to remind everybody that was heavily flagged in the mile report, that there was inconsistent with the availability of high quality instructional materials. And so that's why I'm going to continue to flag how that works into the timeline.
And
Yeah,
in speaking
thank
with Dr. Bolger, it's the inconsistent implementation of it. And so the implementation key component is the part that we wrote the grant specifically to support the implementation of it. And so we're working with Mile to ensure that we provide those supports so that there, you have the material, but it's still in shrink wrap. We want you to unwrap it, and we want to help you use it. So yes, you're right, Dr.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And Dr. Collins, correct me if I'm wrong. We've got that list coming beginning in 25, 26, correct?
Correct.
That's what the data says. Okay, thank you. Any other questions or discussion, Dr. Lewis? You're good? Okay, Mr. Greer?
Hey, everyone. Thank you, Ms. McCusker. Couple thoughts. I'll also echo the team's appreciation for this team in listening, learning, and really going at this full force. So I think we really have a good opportunity to do something special here. I think I've said that a couple of times, but I just applaud this team for listening. So I feel like it would be great if we could get a definition for family-friendly language in the definition section. I have one and I can send it over. What I would suggest is it just encompassing, like, we need to pull out jargon. It does not, like, it needs to note that, and it also should be culturally affirming. So let's do our best there if we can get a definition in there. And then my biggest piece on this one, I echo the timeline sentiments that Dr. Lewis just named regarding HQIM and implementation challenges and the things that we saw in the MILE report. But at the same time, I also feel like we are absolutely, I just, I guess I'll just be really straight. I still feel like this is written in a way that is not going to be in relationship with parents and the decision that's to be made here. And I know that we said in the last meeting that we want this to be a parent choice policy. I still feel like we're writing a mandatory third grade retention policy that has some parent choice language in it. And I feel like if we use the mandatory third grade retention and we're not partnering with our parents, like using shared decision making as a form of consent in working together with them, I don't think that we can call this a parent choice policy. I don't like a mandatory automatic third grade retention, even with the supports that lead up to it. And I do like that we're adding in the idea that a student can progress to fourth grade and still get the supports that they need in literacy. I don't want to have a hardline position of no student should ever be retained, but I do want to have a hardline position of we've got to work together with parents in partnership. And I feel like right now we're still not quite getting there. It's really close. And I think that we can get across the line here. One key item is we have it outlined, and I'm sorry, I don't have exactly where, but we have it outlined that says is designated. I'm sorry, it's in D3, sorry, in the policy. So is designated, I think should be may be designated. I think that will start to send the message that we do need to connect with parents throughout this process to get their consent. And at the same time, I also feel like we should spend a little bit of time outlining not just the risks of retention, but also the risks of promotion. I think parents need to understand both. And I'll echo Ms. Medina's words as well and thoughts. I know it's really difficult to connect with parents, and I know that we're going to need to support around that. But this is the part that I think that we have an opportunity to do something that's really special and different here than what anyone has attempted to do when it comes to ensuring that young people can read. It's bringing parents back into the fold of how to support their young people at home and being partners back in the classroom. And I think this is a really productive way to provide that bridge and that relationship. And of course, I know it's going to be hard and I know it's not going to work everywhere. But I think that we have an obligation to try to repair some of that bridge and support our teachers to want to and to love connecting with parents as I did when I was a teacher. The final note or question, I guess, I missed. I'm sure I can find these, but do we have an example of one of the parent guides ready to roll that we can review?
We'll have a copy of the parent guide by the state board meeting. We have
Cool.
all of the what they call packets together, but we're trying to make sure that they are Maryland specific, but you will have one to review.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Even just a prototype example is really helpful to review so we can get a sense of it.
Anything else, Mr. Greer?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Manley McCarthy?
Hi, thanks everyone. I do want to reiterate the sentiment that you're working really hard in taking in stakeholder information and input. I do want to call your attention to, and I will put a link in the chat, that I reviewed the Reading League of Maryland and the Decoding Dyslexia of Maryland comments that they sent to you. which are very cogent, very, very carefully constructed. And while I haven't been able to go through this latest submission of our policy and what they recommended, I'm hoping that you looked at that document and incorporated many things. I reiterate Mr. Greer's comments on it seems more of a mandate than a partnership on third grade retention. And you know my feelings on that, and I'm not going to reiterate it, but what I do want to say, if you're willing, I do have a couple of thoughts, and they're just a few on specific pages. And if you tell me when you want to do that, and I can tell you what some of my thoughts are. You know, I do appreciate going through different drafts because it's like when you read a paper that you've written and somebody edits it for you, or when you read a student paper, you go back, each time you go back, you know, it's like anything that my staff puts out, I give corrections, I go back and I find something else. So please, you know, I appreciate that. And I wish I could give you all the comments first, but I'm just not that good. So let me know if you want, when you would like me to go page by page on just a couple of things. And it's not a lot, but it's a few.
Do you want to do that now, Joan, or do you want to just type up what you've got and send it into Deanne and Jeanette?
I could, and I can do that. And it's not a lot, but one of them I want to call attention to the
Sure,
universal
whatever you want to do.
screener. On the universal screener, one on page 5 and page 9, there's comprehension on there. I think it's very hard to screen for comprehension. And so I think it should be deleted. When, as a speech pathologist, when we look for oral language comprehension, there's many different components. And if you read the most recent research on reading comprehension, it's wobbly in terms of your comprehension is only as good as the measure. So I don't know that that should be included. And I've struggled with that. And then I finally said, I think I should kind of call attention to that. And then another one, you know, I want to go back to what Dr. Lewis said about, you know, understanding that some kids may struggle with reading, but may need to go forward with the next grade level instruction. I just don't know how that can happen. So if you're going to retain a child in third grade, but still put them in fourth, fifth grade subject matter, which includes, you know, math, reading, social, math, science, social studies, and even the specials, why retain them? Why not just give them the intervention they need in reading as opposed to going through the retention model? But you know my feelings on that. So that's just a note there. The other thing is on page 12, the last one there, number 6, it says if a student has reading goals on their IEP, then the IEP will substitute for the development of an SRIP. I think that can be confusing because I don't know that we still have figured out how to differentiate between this reading intervention plan and when a child needs special education. And the other piece is if a child has an IEP, sometimes they have 1 or 2 goals and it's not comprehensive reading goals. So I think that can be a source of confusion there. And then on page 13, when it says the LEA may designate a third grade student for promotion to grade 4 who does not demonstrate adequate reading proficiency, section III, it says students with disabilities who participate in the statewide ELA assessment or who have an IEP or section 504 that reflects the student has received intensive reading intervention for at least 2 years. Well, here's the problem is that it takes a long time, many times, for a child to be identified as having a reading disability that qualifies for special education services. So if we're looking at third grade and a child first gets identified in second grade, so now we are having them held responsible for only having special education services for 1 year. So I think we might need to look at that. And additionally, when you include Section 504 plan, does not include instruction. Section 504 is only accommodations. And so I think we need to look at that for some specificity. And then when we talk about the child who's designated for promotion to grade 4 with a good cause exemption, I just want to talk about whether the parent resists the third grade retention, and the child goes to fourth grade, anything, I think we should make sure that we include the reading instruction that the child needs within the school day, because there are many parents who just can't take their child before school or after school, and I don't know if that's clear. So, and so I'm happy to type these up, but that's those are my comments this go round. So thank you for listening.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, Dr. Miley McCarthy. Dr. Johnson?
Thank you, everyone, for your extremely hard work on this literacy plan. Do have a couple of questions. One is and it kind of dovetails on what everyone has talked about, promoting students on and still, retaining students, but promoting them on if they have skills in the math and other content areas. So have we or will we devise a guidance document that will help districts and teachers and principals with how to schedule those types of students? Because that is such a paradigm shift at the elementary level.
I think that's where we're going to be putting that, Dr. Johnson, in the guidance documents around the development of the master schedule and
Yeah.
what do those reading blocks and school days look like for those children.
My second question has to deal with the special education. Was special education brought in on designing this plan, and are we assured that we're aligning the policy with some of the policies that are incorporated in the special education department?
Dr. Collins, I think you can probably answer that one.
Yes, they were. We actually had a meeting with them, not only our internal team, but talking to some of our LEA folks with background in special education and some stakeholders with background. And then we actually received specific comments from stakeholders with experience in special education as well that were used. Did I miss anybody, Tanette?
Stakeholders as well as internal MSDE staff as well as the LEA staff.
Yeah, I'm still concerned about who is going to be, where would the reading plan live? Who is going to be primarily responsible for that? I know we talk about teachers, but it's so important that those plans are reviewed and that all of the intervention strategies that we have spoken about are implemented before we talk about retaining children.
And I think that's probably a good piece, Dr. Johnson, to put in our guidance document, but the whole idea of ownership, but also the review piece, because that's something we can advise on for that as well.
And I think, Dr. Wright, it also will live very well in an FAQ,
Yes.
a frequently asked questions document, in that this is not meant to be in addition to your MTSS process. This runs with your MTSS process. And so if you have a student who is struggling right now and you're providing interventions, this is just going to strengthen what you do to support those kiddos.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, Mr. Paul.
Hello. Yes, apologies again for not being on camera. I'll say again, just as everyone else has, amazing work on everything, including, I know the retention policy draws a lot of attention, but there's so much to this policy outside of that as well. And I wanted to really call out the excellent work on the whole thing. This entire project has been impressive and thoughtful and responsively revised and everything like that. Okay, so a couple things that were on my mind. The first thing was, I think we've come a very long way from what could reasonably be called a mandatory retention policy. I mean, what it really feels like is this is a literacy policy where retention in third grade is one of the tools that is now at the disposal of the LEAs, of school leaders, of educators making these decisions with parents, of parents making these decisions for their young people. And so I I want to say, the policy includes language like, designated for retention and all of that. But I think it's important. I mean, at least the way I'm reading it, an initial designation for retention doesn't seem to mean that the decision has been made. It really just means this is the starting point for a conversation with the family. At least that's the way I'm reading the document. And there's an array of possible outcomes that are going to be made between the parent and the school leader. One possibility being promotion with these extra supports. So the first thing I wanted to raise was, could somebody talk to us about the value of when we're talking about the extra supports that go with the promotion option? Could somebody talk to us about the value and importance of having extra support options that operate outside of the traditional school day? I mean, why is it the case that we might need or want additional instructional time outside of just the school day? And can you describe the feasibility or the research basis that suggests that we're going to really have a lot of success doing this with promotion and interventions confined just to the school day? I guess what's the value of extra time there? Is it significant? And can you tell us about that?
So I'll start with that because you bring up a really good point. There actually is a ton of research that supports the power of out of school time when it is aligned, particularly with what is going on during the school day. And a lot of districts get grants to run after school programming. And so one of the most successful ones I've seen are those that also align their programming with what is actually taking place during the school day, so that as children are in after school programs, they're continuing to get the help and support that they need before, let's say they're picked up and taken home or whatever the case might be. But that research is out there about that. So I think that's one of the reasons that we included it. Obviously, it goes without saying that we want them, which is one of the reasons we're providing guidance around master schedules and how much time is being dedicated to not only Core 1 instruction, but also the interventions inside the school day. So we're trying to get at it from both places and not just assuming it all has to happen during the school day. It must happen during the school day, but if it's going to also happen in after school time, what we're going to be recommending is that time get aligned and the content get aligned with what is actually happening during the school day.
That makes a lot of sense. And I'm really sympathetic to the idea that if it were straightforward to do during the hours that we had, if we didn't need more time, then we'd have gotten done in those hours. And so I really appreciate the need for potentially having some more time. And so, that's going to be something where we're going to have to talk to parents about what is feasible, and I guess impress upon everyone the school level, at the LEA level, parents, impress upon everyone the sort of dire importance of getting it right in this window that we have, the urgency of that. I guess I'll leave it there for now. I want to compliment the team on the way we've seen the policy progress from something that was a pretty hard line to something where the retention option is one option in an array of tools at our disposal. And that the designation that we see here is the beginning of a conversation. So I appreciate everyone's work on that. I hope that what we'll keep in mind as we think about the policy is, do we believe that these interventions work? Do we believe that the things we're laying out in this policy will have positive impacts on young people's ability to read? Do we believe that the research on early grade retention is what it seems to be, at least from my understanding, as distinguished from later grade retention? And do we believe that that the policy as it's written really is the beginning of it describes a conversation, a collaboration between the school teams and the parents? I think it does. I think there's an opportunity here to do a tremendous amount of good. All parts of this policy, not just the sort of lightning rod element that I think is attracting a lot of attention. But again, let me just say, appreciate everyone's really hard work on this. And I know You've done a lot to accommodate a wide array of different opinions on how this should work, and but I appreciate everyone's really hard work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Paul, Mr. Crawford, and then Dr. Getty.
Thank you. I really appreciate the hard work of the department and our board. I appreciate our board's consistent focus on one thing: children. What do we do? What can we do that will make a difference in the lives of children? That is incredibly significant. When you look across the country and you look at what's going on in different states or communities, they're focused on everything but children. I want to again just compliment the board and the department for that. I want to speak to a couple of things. I want to go back to some of the data that Dr. Smith shared about lack of progress from year to year. So when I look at those numbers, I see me. I see me. And one of the things that we have to recognize is that when children are in a situation where they are not experiencing success year after year, while the statistics say it's a 3% increase or whatever, what it does psychologically to children is that unless they hear it elsewhere, it reinforces the notion that I can't learn. Mm-hmm. The second thing that it does is, I would imagine, for educators, well-intentioned, but year after year, decade after decade, children not performing, if we're not careful, what begins to develop then are lower expectations that say that this type of child can't learn. So we begin to accept that. I'm not excited about the notion of retention per se, but I am very keen to the notion that if we want a different outcome, we're going to have to do things differently. Doing things differently means there's a level of discomfort. Anytime you do something new, there's a level of discomfort. My question to the department as we go through this is, as we're trying to accommodate everybody and everything, I want to pick up on Mr. Paul's point. At the end of the day, we need to make sure that we have enough of a change in place that will result in the outcomes that we want. Recognizing that in the short term, it's going to be uncomfortable. In the short term, we're going to have to adjust, and we'll start down one path, and we may find that we have to make an adjustment. That's okay. Mm-hmm. But we've got to make sure that what we're going forward with, for all of the time, the energy, and the investment that's being made, we have to make sure that what we're proposing will work. And if that means that we make the adults feel a little bit uncomfortable in the process, fine. Our job is educating children, and our job is to do the very best thing we can do for children. I want to applaud the department for its work, and I want to applaud this board that has been consistently focused on one thing: educating children. And in that process, being willing to do what is uncomfortable, and at times things that we didn't personally want to do, but it was the right thing to do for children. So as we go forward, don't water it down any more than it has to. We need to make sure that what we're going to do works. And the fact and the status quo says, from the data from Dr. Smith, is when we look at this issue, we just need to remember children are being harmed today, and they're being harmed tomorrow. So if we don't change the trajectory, we're harming kids. So status quo So the starting point is not that children are not being harmed. Children are being harmed. So what do we do then, given where we are, to begin to change the outcomes for children? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Crawford. Dr. Getty?
Hello, everybody. I would be very remiss if I didn't personally thank Dr. Smith and Dr. Collins for adding pre-K, for all my fussing about it. I appreciate your hard work. It is fabulous. It's not only a personal deep belief that pre-K children can participate in a literacy program. If you're a non-believer, all you have to do is talk to Josh Michael about his daughter's experience in pre-K last year. The instruction she received was intentional, deliberate, sequential, from great knowledge of the teacher to individualizing the instruction. And his daughter became a reader and writer in pre-K. And I would say every child in the state of Maryland deserves that kind of approach to literacy. It isn't something to put off to kindergarten, or some people still believe first grade or whatever. It just isn't. So thank you so much. I appreciate you all. The second thing is just a little word thing I'd like Joan to weigh in on. In the definition of dyslexia, it says, despite effective instruction. I think the word effective really is about, you're trying to convey the idea that despite high quality, or despite direct instruction, or despite some kind of instruction, but it's not effective yet if we're defining dyslexia. I think it implies yet to be effective. So Joan can weigh in on that. The third thing is when, let me see, Miss Lewis talks about appropriate instruction for the third grader retained to go on in other subjects with fourth grade. I would just like to convey a little bit of consternation about that, in that eventually you can't push the ball down the road because the school building ends at fifth grade. And if the fifth grader needs sixth grade math, it's in a different building, most likely. And we just get more and more complicated as we retain children, but they need instruction in a different grade level. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Getty. Any other questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, it has been requested of our committee that we make a recommendation regarding adoption of the policy to the broader board for our meeting on the 22nd. Assuming that many of the things we have spoken about today, to do some other few edits, I think we need to make a vote or have a motion regarding that at this time. Do I have any committee members who wish to make a motion?
I'll move adopt a sorry.
Go ahead, Mr. Paul.
Great. I'll move a recommendation of the adoption of the policy with the feedback provided tonight incorporated.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion on the or do I have a second? I'm sorry. Do I have a second?
I'll second. This is Monica.
Thank you, Dr. Goldson. Any discussion? Okay, then we're going to take a vote. Since we don't have everyone on camera, I'm going to need you to make sure you have your mic open, so that we can record a voice vote. If we need to, we'll come back and check with some people, but all in favor of making a recommendation to adopt, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Mr. Gadam. Okay. Anyone in not in favor, please raise your hand and say nay.
Nay.
Yay.
Okay, Dr. Millie McCarthy, Dr. Lewis. Any abstentions, please raise your hand and say abstain. Okay, Mr. Hands, can you please give me a tally on that vote?
Yes, motion carries 5-2.
Okay, thank you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, this has been a really long process, and we are doing everything we can to get it right and to put forward something that's going to change the lives of kids in the state of Maryland and the way they're being instructed in schools across the state. So thank you for your really diligent work. We look forward to seeing the final copy to come before the board with the couple of changes that were recommended today. And I thank everyone for their time and attention. Our next meeting is on, I believe, the 14th of November. Do I have that right, Mr. Hands?
That is correct.
Okay, so our next meeting will be on the 14th of November, again at 4 o'clock. And again, thank you to staff and thank you to the public for being here and their time and attention. Thank you to all of the board members who were here today, many of whom are not on this committee, but still are weighing in with excellent feedback. So everybody have a wonderful evening and thank you.
Thank you.